Welcome back to Build a Mobile App in 2 hours. In this session, we'd like to complete the Select Planet screen. So we've already updated the links and managed the data, and now we're going to use the stacked cards to display the list of planets, and then swipe and create the list of selected planets. So you can see we'll be able to display some data, and then the swipes will give us feedback as to whether or not the card is selected. So let's go ahead and get started. To complete the Select Planet screen, we want to add stacked cards to the content area. So we can go over to the toolbox and we could scroll and look for the stacked cards, but it may be easier to go to the top, search, and when we type in stack, we can get the stacked cards and drag and drop it to the content area. At the top, it needs some data for the stacked cards because the stack of cards is a list. And we can see that the list at the moment doesn't know what the source is. So if we open the drop-down menu, we can see that Get Local Planets list is available. So this will now load the stacked cards with our planets, and then we'll be able to use the overlays to do the swipes. When we look at the bottom of the list, there's an event called onScrollEnding. So if it loads some of the planets and then it gets to the bottom of the list, what should it do next? So again, if we go to the drop-down, we could create a new client action or do a new infinite scroll client action. So we'll select that. Infinite scroll is a lazy loading pattern that is now implemented inside of onScrollEnding. So we can see Select Planets has the onScrollEnding action, and if we double click, what it's going to do is get the local planets, make sure it has some data, and then see if the current list's length is greater than or equal to the max records minus the increment. And as long as it is, then it's going to increment the max records, and then it will refresh the local planets. So what this does is load a set of them, and then once it runs out of the space that it needs, it can go and get more. So we'll go back to our screen, and in this case, we can see that onScrollEnding has the increment records, and we only have 20 planets. So to prove that this is working, let's set this to 10, and then increment is going to happen over the maximum number of records. So let's set this to 10 as well. So this means we'll start with 10, and then once we run out, we'll get another 10. So that will cause us to be able to load our planets twice. Now that we have the list and the availability to continually upgrade the list, let's grab an image and place it inside of the data area. So we want to be able to show a picture of the planet, and here we're looking for a local image, but we haven't loaded any local images of planets. So if we go down to the image folder, we can right-click, import an image, and here we have an image of Mars. So we'll select the planet image and open it, and now we'll go back to the list and say use the image which is the planet image. Now we want to make sure that this planet image is going to fit inside the area that it has, so we'll ask it to fill parent, and then to be able to customize this area a little better, let's go to the widget tree and we'll put the image inside of a container, and we'll have this container fill the parent as well. So that looks good. Now we start with the planet, and we'd like underneath the planet to be able to put its name and its description. To do that, we'll need a margin container to be able to put the text. So there's the margin container, and we can drag and drop that in between the two layers of the images, and sometimes it's hard to get the blue line exactly where you want it. So something else you can do is just drag it over to the widget tree and place it right where you think you'd like it. So now we have the margin container that gives us a little bit of space around the picture. And if we clear the search, what we really want to do is be able to put an expression inside of here that will bring back the name of the planet. So it immediately opens the expression editor, and in this case we'll open the planet list, we'll get the current planet, and for it we'll ask for the name. And we'll click Done. So now our expression is going to get the name back, and at the moment it's only taking up a little bit of the space inside of the margin container. So we want to make sure nothing's next to the name, so we'll ask it to fill parent, and we'd like it to be a little bit bolder. So in style class we'll use a quote and look for a heading tag. Heading 1 is really big, so maybe we'll go down to heading 2. That looks a little better. We'll select that one. So at this point we've got the name. We'd like to put the description in here as well. So if we right click on the current name expression, we can copy that and we can drop it back in the margin container and paste it. And when we paste it, now we have a second name, but we really don't want the name here. What we'd like is, if we go down to the properties, we see that it has some suggestions including the description. And we do want it to fill the parent, but this is just regular text, so we don't need it to be a header or to be more bold, and that looks nice. We do want to make sure there's a little space between the name of the planet, so let's give it a top margin of 10 pixels just to make sure the description's a little bit below where we are for the name. Now, this is going to be a margin container that, depending on the size of the image, is going to try to fill up the rest of the screen. So to do that, we're going to use some CSS to style this. And because it's in the margin container, we'll set a style for the margin container. And we'll set that style to have a height. And in this case, the height is going to be a calculation. And we have a way of using some various equations to try to know what the vertical height is, change it by a number of pixels, and then also adjust to the width. So we'll go ahead and set that. And then besides the height and calculating what we need there, we'd like to create a border. And in this case, the border should be just 1 pixel. We'd like it to be solid, and then we'd like it to be light gray. So we'll choose light gray, and we'll set that. We'd also like the border at the top, and here we're going to need to scroll a bit. So we find the border top, and we don't want this to have any space between the picture, so we're going to set it to 0 pixels. And now we have a style that sets that up well. Okay, so at this point we've got what we want as far as the look and feel inside the list. Now we'd like to be able to deal with the swiping left and swiping right. We want to give them some feedback, so let's use an icon, and besides the color, let's go ahead and look for the remove icon. So the X will tell them that we're not going to select it. And we'll grab another icon, we'll put it in the positive, and in this case we'll look for a check mark where we know that this is the right one. So these swipes are now part of what is being referred to as the overlay. So to be able to see the overlay, let's go to the interaction stack card in the widget tree, and here the different events allow us to know what's going to happen when we swipe left or swipe right. But to be able to have any of these work and use the overlays, we have to say use overlays to true. Now when we swipe left, we're just throwing the planet away, so we don't need anything to happen. But when we swipe right, we wish to be able to put that in the list of things to save. So let's create a new client action to be the handler. And in this case, we'll grab a client action in this action. And what we'd like to do is be able to create a list. So the system has the ability for us to append things to the list. And when we append things to the list, we need to know what's the list that's going to hold things. And in this case, it's our selected planets ID list. And what's the element that's going to go in there. And to that, we'll have to open the expression editor. And here we can see that when we do the swipe, it knows the current position in the stack of cards. And we're going to need to be able to use that because we'll be working inside of getLocalPlanets and we're working inside the list. But we won't know which one is the current one in the list. So we'll set the list. We'll then open it as an array. And we'll go back up and use the current position in the stacked cards. We'll close that, and if this worked right, when we hit the dot, it knows that we're working with local planets. And if I do it again, we're going to be using the ID here. So if we click Done, we're now adding the IDs to the list, and that gives us what we need for the behavior of the stacked cards. So at this point, we have everything we need. Everything looks good. So let's go ahead and publish this to the server and see how it looks inside of the emulator. Okay, so if we open in the browser, we see PlanetHopper. It's been updated. We'll log in, and we'll create a new event. We'll call this test 1. We'll pick some dates, and we'll continue. We don't seem to have any planets, which seems strange. And this is because earlier, if we remember back far enough, we were actually trying to synchronize the data to the local storage. So there are no planets on the device yet. We need to log out and then log back in. And once we log back in, the synchronization should be happening in the background now. So we can click on New Event. We'll ask it to be the test 1 again. We'll pick some dates, and we continue to select the planets. And here we can see our cards. And if we swipe left, we see the red, swipe right, and we can keep going. And if we get past number 10, and there goes number 10, it will load the second set. So infinite scroll is working, our swiping is working, and we can go ahead and book the trip. And it goes back to the dashboard. So at this point, everything is working as far as we wanted for the stacked cards and for our select planet screens. So join me in the next section where we're going to, instead of just using the same picture of the planet, retrieve some planets from a RESTful service, and then we'll import those so we can have different planets inside of our app.